If you find you're unsettled listening today, reach out to a trusted friend or go to tradespodcast.com and click on resources.
We are worker driven, no nonsense conversations about mental health in the trades.
This is Off the Clock Toolbox Talk.
So very excited to have Peter White, aka Peter Notsowhite, here with us today on Off the Clock Toolbox Talk. Peter, I know our paths crossed not too long ago. I've been a big fan of your channel for a number of years, but more recently, you became aware of a project I was working on called The Forge at the time, which is now called Muster Point. And you reached out to connect, and that's when I became aware that you are actually a skilled trade, an iron worker, and yeah, I mean, let's let you take it from there.
So yeah, Kisuk Kisukukit Kapinishkish Hugachit Kanchukit Tishmiet Hugachiaki Yakanuki Hunini Tunacha Husukani. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Peter White. I just introduced myself in my father's language, which is comes from the Tunacha people. And then on my mother's side, I come from around the Puget Sound area, also known as Seattle. My mom is enrolled in with the Tulalip tribe. We also have relatives from the Snoqualmie people, the Skykomish people, and the Duwamish people.
Beautiful. So it must have been a lot of texture growing up, a lot of different communities to belong to.
Yeah, just actually more recently, probably within the last decade since I got sober, I've started to reconnect more. I
Mm.
grew up in a foster home, so I was adopted out pretty much right out of the hospital. Uh,
Mm.
my mom, my mom adopted me out to one of her friends, her neighbor actually at the time, when I was just a baby. So
Okay.
I've been slowly here and there reconnecting.
Tell us how it all started. Let's get into your story.
For me, it's almost been about 12 years now. Actually,
Wow.
well, I've been longer than that in the trades, but for me, at my on my journey of sobriety, it's been just over 12 years ago. Yeah.
Wow.
Actually, June 15th is my year around the sun, Earth
Good for
for my
you.
sobriety date. And
Okay.
yes, that's about 12 years ago. I was actually working, I believe I was actually up in the up in Fort Mac.
Wow.
I was doing it was a 10 and 4 job, and I was working for Harris Rebar at the time up in Syncrude, and I was with a person at the time. We're just friends now, but I found myself in a spot where I was heavily drinking a lot,
Mm.
where I would come back from a days off and I would just pretty much party on my money away, making good money at the time in
Yeah.
Fort McMurray, because this job that I was working on was actually one of their full collective bargaining agreements. It was one of the last ones they had up there.
Yeah.
So it was pretty good income. When
Nice.
I found myself, I would just come home, party for the few days I was at home, and then it just deplete the money, just like my savings that I had just constantly. And I was with this girl who had a little daughter at the time, and we're starting to get serious. And yeah, it was just I could started to kind of resemble myself and my parents.
Mm.
That's why I was adopted out as a baby. My parents they struggle with addiction. My father did even till up to the day he passed away a few years ago. My mom did too until just recently. She just passed her 2 year sobriety.
Good for her.
So both of them have struggled with their addictions. And as I started growing up and as I started getting sober and learning more about the history of what's happened throughout Canada, even America, I really started to realize that it wasn't due to their own their effects. It was just my grandfather and my grandmother on my father's side. They both went to residential schools. And I know just from hearing stories, my father or my grandfather went to residential schools, and I believe he left around when he was 16 or 17, and he enlisted into the war.
Mm.
So that was a thing for them. If they wanted to enlist, they could actually leave the school to go fight in the war. So he went and fought in the war and then came back with all that trauma on top of trauma, and he pretty much drank himself to death. And he passed away, I believe it was like 2 years before I was even born, 2, 3 years. So I never got to meet him. And same thing with my grandmother. I actually just recently found out who her name was. So I'm still reconnecting. And that's how my story's still going. And with my mom, my grandma and some of the like my family on that side they went to boarding schools. So it was the same thing, but it was what they called it down in the States was boarding schools.
Okay. But virtually the same thing, the same intent is to assimilate a
Yeah.
community of people. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it was like the quote was to kill the Indian and save the man.
Mm, that is brutal. That is a brutal, honest truth.
Peter, as you were just starting to talk now, I was also just thinking about that the intergenerational trauma is something that we talk about a lot on this podcast in general, but it's so blatantly obvious with Indigenous societies. And in 5 minutes, you just rattled off trauma after trauma after trauma after trauma. And I'm always just virtually speechless at the resiliency that I see in, that you're sitting here now and you're able to name it and describe it and tell the story is just incredible to me.
Yeah. I'm a big believer in everything happening for the right reasons. Yeah, everything that's happened to me has kind of brought me to where I am in my life right now
Mm,
Mm-hmm.
and where I'm going. And yeah, intergenerational trauma is a thing because I was adopted into a family where my mom, she didn't drink. Like she's maybe drank maybe 2, 3 times in her whole entire life. She didn't really like it at all. So I wasn't raised around that at all. I was raised in a pretty loving home. I was really fortunate enough to be adopted into a really loving home.
Mm-hmm.
But when I was 15, when I first had my very first sip of alcohol, I was just like instantly hooked. I was just I
Yeah.
blacked out my first time
mm,
and it was hooked. It was just like something I'd never experienced before. And now realizing, with like epigenetics and all that stuff and how intergenerational trauma is in the body,
mm,
Mm-hmm.
it just really like I just never realized like how set up to be an alcoholic I was. Like, it was
Wow.
just through my both of my parents and my grandparents and great grandparents. Everything just keeps, it keeps getting put into your genes and who you are. And I just found it weird how, yeah, I was hooked instantly.
Mm.
that's what I think something that a lot of people or listeners might not understand completely is that when we say intergenerational trauma, it's not just a figment of the imagination or some hard thought that gets passed down from generation to generation. It's actually blueprinted, like it's printed into the genetics of individuals, where it leaves a foundational mark on you before you even have awareness, before we even grow up with the awareness that we have these challenges.
Yeah.
Um, and then what I hear and I've learned is a lot of people experience the side effects of it before they're even aware of what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah. And just as a child, even not like you're obvious, most adults aren't aware when they're in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. But certainly as a child, you're not aware that your body is going into these things. It's that nature nurture argument of, and it's both, right? Like it's like you're predisposed to it in the first place. Like Peter, just knowing about that your mom gave you over for adoption to a good family, right? But knowing that is a kind of trauma, right? So then it's like, how do you process that as a kid? Never mind an adult,
Mm,
right?
She did have my older brother with her.
Mm,
She kept on to him, but yeah, he like just throughout situations, he actually passed away when I was 2. And
mm,
that's actually
oh,
my first memories as a kid was being at my older brother's wake, like during before the funeral. We have certain things, certain situations, like we have certain ceremonies when people pass, and my mom used her West Coast side, and she brought some people up from down in Seattle. We were actually living in Creston, British Columbia at the time,
mm-hmm,
around my father's reservation. That was my first memories was that. And then the next day walking up to his graveyard, like where they were burying him. So it was
mm-hmm,
through my first two memories. And that, for a lot of Indigenous people, it's trauma. It's like a lot of trauma, traumatic things. And to be able to remember at 2 years old, it's
Yeah.
your first memories. It's kind of hard. It's been hard to work through, but I've been working through it a lot.
Wow.
Yeah. And not just your memories of like you're trying to interpret the event, but you're also trying to interpret everybody else's emotions and energy at the funeral, right, or at the memorial. And it's just like 2 year olds aren't wired for that, right? Like it's that's a lot.
Hmm. Yeah. Condolences, man. I'm sorry to hear about all that loss.
Yeah, that took me down a whirlwind. I dropped out in grade 12. I found I was better with my hands and working than being in school. I didn't see much for myself, graduating and things like that. I didn't see myself going to college. And I was trying things in there. My older adopted brother brought me up to Grand Prairie for a little while, where I tried out the oil field. Wasn't my really big cup of tea. And then I moved down here to the Lower Mainland, where I live now, and I just did odd jobs here and there. I've worked at TLC. I've worked at a lot of those places where you just get cash.
Yeah.
And, I've worked many a jobs, done roofing. I've done waterproofing. I've done chicken catching. I've done all that stuff, and that was all to kind of feed my addiction on alcohol.
Hmm.
I would just get cash here, and then kind of had a house down here and got evicted because the guy ended up doing some illegal stuff. So I ended up getting kicked out of the house, and I was homeless for a while. Actually, it was right around when I was 18. I was living out in Surrey, kind of living on the streets, kind of crashing on my friends' houses here and there once in a while. And I was just doing these odd jobs, TLC and all these things. And then one of my good friends' dad asked me, he kind of knew I was doing like jobs here and there, and he wanted to help me up somewhat. And he ended up asking me if I wanted a job doing rebar, and I ended up saying yeah. And my very first job doing rebar was on the Golden Years Bridge, and that
Wow.
was a wake up call. Like that was a wake up call on what work actually was. Like I remember my second day. I was staying at a friend's house and I was so sore. I literally had to roll myself off of the couch to like get
Mhm.
up because my body was just so sore.
And
Oh,
how old were you then?
I was 18.
wow. Yeah.
So you don't have even have age as an excuse.
Yeah, no, but I enjoyed it though. I
Yeah.
see my very first paycheck. Well, I guess I could do this. Yeah, I could see
Yeah.
myself doing that. And then I kind of bumped around to the companies, also struggled with my addiction as well, kind of following me around.
Hmm.
And I worked for a company called Real Steel at the Olympic Village for a little while.
Wow.
And that was kind of when I realized when I had a little bit of a problem. And I knew the owner, his wife is Indigenous. And I kind of want to talk to him. I was like, I kind of having a drinking problem. I think maybe I should move back home to Vernon where my family is and try to work on it. And that just made it worse for me. I ended up getting fired from him not too long after that because I got drunk on my birthday and missed.
Hmm.
It was 50 cent highballs and it was like 3.50 for a jug of beer that
Yeah.
night. So yeah, I ended up staying out too late.
Yeah. And do you think if you hadn't told him what your situation was, do you think you would have let that mistake go?
No, he probably would have fired me
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
back then. Yeah,
So it
yeah,
didn't
because it
change
was
anything.
I've heard it said that, well, all the trades have their own special kind of difficulties to them, but I've heard rebar is the worst.
Tough as
oh, yeah,
nails. Yeah.
Yeah.
definitely, and that's where the
Yeah.
drinking goes hand in hand. Because
Totally.
Yep.
when I was an apprentice, I was actually okay. You're the apprentice on Fridays, and our payday for some companies. They let us go like an hour early to go to the beer store. Everyone would chip in, and I'd bring the beer back to the job site and throw it in the lunchroom in the fridge, and then we would drink after work. So it was like a common thing, and it was like a rite of passage almost.
Yeah.
That's what it's bred into the culture of construction is hanging out with all the boys and drinking after work. You got to
The
be, yeah, that's how
harder
you fit in.
harder we work, the harder we play.
Yeah.
It's part of like what brings us together too. Like I have a lot of regrets in my life, but the camaraderie that was built around this stuff, I wish it wasn't so destructive for me because, I enjoyed a lot of those times. I felt really close to the guys around me.
myself, I was fortunate not to get into drugs, but
Mm.
some of the guys, it was the drugs, you drinking and drugging and then like going out after work in your dirty clothes sometimes on paydays and we'd go to the strip club once in a while or go to the bar and hang out and drink for hours and then go back and shower and then meet up with them, go somewhere.
And it's like Groundhog Day. You just keep doing the same cycle over and over again. Nothing changes. I think you spoke to about like going home and having a shower at some point, but I distinctly remember there were weekends where I'd leave on Friday and I'd call in sick on Monday and I'd show up in the same clothes I left work in and Friday having not showered yet. We just went and it was
Ew.
yeah, super gross. But yeah, it gets, I think, we look at marathon runners and extreme sports people for showing what the boundaries of the limits of the human body are. But I'll argue that maybe rebar guys and carpenters and construction workers are probably better suited to tell you what the limits of the human condition are, because we've
Oh
we've
yeah.
pushed those limits.
Yeah.
So how long did that go on? Like it sounds like you wrestled with some substance use, early alcoholism for a number of years, and probably lost some opportunities because of it.
Yeah. Till I was about 24.
Mm.
I struggled off and on with alcohol, where I'd get good jobs and then like it would just ruin it sometimes by missing days. Like, oh, I'll show up on Saturday. Yeah, I'll for sure be there. And nope, just gone drinking. And I'd wake up hammered still and just keep going. Miss some good opportunities, miss some good jobs. One of them was I was working on the Portman Bridge, the same thing, kind of just missing days and slacking for that. And when it started to slow down, ended up I'd get let go during the holidays and come back when I was really busy and then let go and then when it really slowed down, yeah, my alcohol was really like I was really deep into it then and I ended up getting let go and then just struggling. That's where I had to go to Fort McMurray there was no work around here. I remember being an apprentice making like 29 something bucks an hour and then where I ended up going to Fort McMurray for a while.
Mm. And how did that shift things?
It was I wouldn't drink for the whole time I was out there. It was good. That was one thing I didn't do. I was just there to work, and that kind of helped me out. I think that I wasn't drinking even when some of the guys would want to go into town and party, and I'd be like, no, I'm here to work. I'm here to make money, and that's ultimately what kind of helped set me up to realize I had a problem. And then when I went down that road with that girl I was seeing, I remember the last time I did have a drink. I was working for McMurray. I was on my days off, and I was with another buddy I did rebar with, one of my good friends now. We're still good friends. He's been over a year sober now as well, but we were putting together a gazebo that I had bought and I remember having a few sips of the beer and it just tasted off. Like something tasted different about it. And I was like, I don't know, man, my beer tastes weird. And I asked him, and he took a drink of it and he's like, no, it tastes fine to me. And then I had another sip and that's when it clicked that alcohol just wasn't for me anymore. And then
Wow.
yeah, it just like was a light switch that went off because I had kind of quit previous to that. I quit drinking for 3 months, and then I ended up having a few days before that, and I told myself, okay, I'm gonna buy a six pack and that's it. And like after that six pack was done, it was one of the hardest things I had to fight. It was just realizing that I had a problem. Like I
Wow.
really had to fight everything within me not to go buy more alcohol and like to go party with my buddies.
Jeez. Good for you, man. That's interesting. We don't hear that story often that it just tasted different. I mean, you went through a battle not getting more alcohol, to be clear. But then there came that point where it was just like, this isn't for me.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
it's
yeah. It was like
beautiful.
I feel like it was, being spiritual. It was just accumulation of prayers from like my ancestors and like people in my community and people around me. Like they knew where I was going. Like they knew I was a mess. Like a lot of people knew I was a mess. Like just like even my adopted brother and his partner. They just knew I was a big mess and I would just ruin things, with
Hmm.
my alcoholism. I'd ruin good things that were going for me just despite it alcohol. And when I was kind of realizing I did have a problem with alcohol and that light flash switch saying, it's not for me anymore. It was just like a light that came through.
I don't know anybody in my circle of recovery who they're not just sober, but they have a good quality of life. I don't know anybody that got there without some spiritual solutions, whatever that looks like for them. But like for me personally, a lot of what I struggled with and a lot of the pain and a lot of the challenges I dealt with in my addiction were all very spiritual questions in nature. Who am I? What I don't belong here. I'm going to wind up alone and nobody will love me. Like all these fears to me, that's not science. That's spirit. That's questions of the soul. It's questions of the spirit. Most of the people I know have a very similar experience to some extent, and the answers we found are not in science. They're usually in finding spiritual literacy and direction, whether it's religion or just believing in something. I know for yourself, your culture has been a big part of your story, and we tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, I was freshly 2 years into my sobriety actually, and actually just kind of as I got sober, better opportunities started to come for me. I was
Yes.
working up on that job site, and an opportunity for me came up to jump over to the structural side of ironworking. So I pretty much kept my camp room, went home for it was like 7 days, and I ended up switching over to KBR from Harris. I was working on Syncrude FFT. We were doing tailing ponds, so it was like my first time getting to like get into like some pretty neat, interesting ironwork and stuff, like big mods and things like that. But when I was a little boy, I would go watch my brother's grandpa, and we had a powwow in our community. And during my days off and things like that, I had actually recently split from my partner at the time when I got sober, and I was just lost. I would just go around to local powwows in Vancouver, and I drove down to a few down to the States as well, just to hang out. And I remember I was down in Seattle, and they have one down at Seafair. There's this little kind of island down in Seattle. It's pretty powerful. It's in the woods and stuff like that, and it's very quiet. You wouldn't even know you were in Seattle. It's very, very peaceful. And I was just sitting there, and I remember I was like, wow, this would be cool to go out there and dance. And because I used to participate, I was learning a little bit about powwow when I was younger, when I was 8 and 9, before we moved away from Creston to Vernon. And then I was just like, yeah, this would be kind of cool. And I was kind of traveling around, and then during that time, um, I had like a big cyst looking thing growing on the top of my foot, and I was working on a job, and I got hurt, and I ended up having to go in and get taken out, and that's when I ended up finding out I had a tumor growing on the top of my foot, on my right
Oh,
foot. So I was,
goodness.
yeah, I'm a big believer in everything happened for a right reason, and turned out to be cancer. And prior to that, I was doing like tests and things like that, and I went to BC Cancer Agency a couple of times, and then the one time they were like, "Oh, just be prepared, it might be cancer, right?" And I'm, the typical person like, "Oh, that's never gonna happen to
Right.
me." We think
Yeah.
we're invincible, we're bulletproof, and then when they came in to let me know the verdict, I could just tell right away, like on their faces, their energy they were carrying in, that it was cancer, and they didn't even have to tell me. I already knew,
Yeah.
but they ended up telling me, and they gave me some information, and as I was driving home, I called my adopted mom up, and we're talking, and that's when something came to me, that voice again. And it was like, yeah, maybe it's time that you need to start reconnecting with your culture. And that's when I kind of started to grow my hair out and learn my father's language. Started to actually I started pushing to get a regalia together so I could start dancing powwow, and that's where it all just took off from there.
Wow. That's amazing, man. What kind of a setback was that though, being an iron worker with a tumor on your foot and new to the powwow scene? Like feet are pretty integral to both those things.
Yeah, it was a big setback. I was actually out of work for about a year. And then when I came back into it, I just became a journeyman. So I ended up working I was fortunate enough I got a job with IATSE. I was a rigging grip for a while, and they kept me busy for quite some bit. So it was nice that I was able to kind of get back on my feet in an easier way. If I would have went back to rebar or to general ironworking, I don't know if I would have lasted long because it was like I've had like several surgeries on my foot, my right foot. I've had my tendons from my two middle toes severed, and then they attached them to my big toe.
Wow.
So they're all
Wow.
connected together. So it's been learning how to walk again, and then I've had multiple veins tapped into each other and closed off. So it was a lot of learning how to kind of walk again. And that was one of the thoughts that I had when I was about to go through the surgery. It was like, if am I ever gonna be able to iron work again? What am I gonna
Yeah.
do? Like it
Hmm.
was, yeah, it was a big scare for me because we use our feet for everything. I was like, both of my ear our both my red seals require me to be physical demanding. Like it's a lot, and people don't realize that, it just takes one fall or one thing like that, one mess up, one hurt, and you're gonna have to change careers. And I've seen it happen, unfortunately, to a few people where they've had to just totally change their whole careers.
I'm wondering about, like, there's so much fear that emerges when we have a health scare or something like that come up. I'm curious about how your spirituality affected the fears, or like reduced the fears, or like how to, and I mean, ultimately, the antidote to fear is love and getting reconnected with love. So I don't know if you've ever thought of it that way, or if you have any comments on that.
I was a little afraid, but it was more, that's when I started to pray more and get more into my spiritual path. And I kind of felt like it was just for me to leave up to a creator at that time.
Mhm.
And like it was a blessing. And that's the way I look at it now. I was even like during the time, like through my treatments and like being at a work, I always looked at it as a blessing because it kind of brought me back to a community um, where I needed, because I felt lost during my
Mhm.
beginning of my sobriety. And that's one thing I've learned is if you don't have a uplifting, supporting community, you'll end up relapsing and failing. You need to have those supports. And that's what was the big thing for me, was that support and meeting new people and learning new things and like just figuring who I was as an Indigenous person.
Wow. And even just that perspective of seeing it as a blessing is a kind of love, and it reduces the fear. And I'm just fascinated to learn how people made it through these really difficult circumstances. And, one of my curiosities is when people, like, let's talk specifically cancer. There's the whole fuck cancer movement, which is great, and I'm glad it's there. But there are many spiritualists who believe that that which we fight against and rage against feeds the negative energy, versus receiving love, and seeing that this is an opportunity that's been brought to me by the creator, or whatever it is that you believe in, your highest self. I'm fascinated by your perspective, just the difference that that makes with the fear, because the fear is the thing that chokes the life out of us.
That's the way I look at it now with cancer is I feel like it's a disconnect. Uh, through Indigenous people, for us, it's, that disconnect, that relationship we had with food, the way we respected things, the way when we would kill an animal, we would use everything with it, we would respect it, we would pray for it, we give thanks, we would honor that spirit and that soul. And like nowadays, you don't have to kill. You can just go to the grocery store and get your
Yeah.
food. And there's a big disconnect I feel with that, even with non-Indigenous people as well, as like their
Mm-hmm.
ancestors and how they used to eat, and looking at that and not even having like a respect for the food that you get nowadays. And that's, I'm starting to learn how to like just pray for the food that you have, even if you buy from a grocery store. It's just having that respect and honoring it, that animal, or if you're vegan or whatever, that plant gave its whole life, its whole energy for you. So giving gratitude is a
Mm,
big thing in Indigenous way. And even if you don't have to be religious, just saying thank you is a
thank
big
you.
thing.
Thank you as a big deal. When I started learning how I was becoming so aware of how I was doing it wrong and how wrong I was doing it, as in being a man and living life, uh, and could clearly see an industry full of people that were struggling, um, I it built a sense of responsibility in me to kind of share what I had learned with others without like you indicated, not forcing it on people. But if I have young men that I'm bringing up as apprentices, or if I have the opportunity, I do some teaching now, I do some public speaking, but I get to spend time and spaces with young men, especially. I will never not talk about the lessons I've learned, in the hope that they avoid some of the conflicts that I went through. I mean, it just seems selfish not to.
Yeah, that's one thing. And I even share that I was homeless at 18.
Oh,
And
wow.
like I struggled through addiction, and I was like, you can end up down that road, or you can, be ahead. And I was like, I wish if I had a journeyman tell me these things, I would have been so honored. Like I've had a few apprentices where I was working on that patella, the Stella Lawson Bridge, and I was just like showing them like, hey, this is how you, as I learned myself, I'm like, hey, this is how you save up and do this and do that. And like, they're like, wow, I never thought of that. And I'm like, so even like simply what I've learned from like reading about money and things like that is telling young apprentices, go get a credit card, but use that credit card instead of your debit card. Make sure you pay it off though,
Mhm.
like build up that credit. So when you want to go buy a house or you want to get a car or something like that, it's there.
Um, I want to just bring it back to reconnecting with your culture because I know there's like another chapter in this, which is your online presence, but that is built on your dancing and connection to powwow culture.
Yeah, so I've been able to travel throughout North America, and sometimes you get to sit there and listen to elders talk, or
Mm.
you hear stories throughout the powwow and things like that, or just certain things that happen. And some of these teachings I carry on, and I try to post on my social media and be very, very positive because there's a lot of negativity in the world, especially nowadays. And I try to change that. Even though like myself, I'm human, I'm not always positive as well, but it also reminds me to like walk when I'm talking. So that's why I do post the things I post when I find myself getting stressed in traffic. I currently just moved to Chilliwack, so I was driving to the Still Lawson Bridge, and it was like in the morning time I was okay because I was leaving so early, but in the evening times it was like almost 2 hours to get home after working 10, 12 hours. And you get frustrated, and it just reminds you to walk that walk. And I've learned a lot of amazing things. And one of the things that Powell has taught me is we were born with two eyes and two ears and one mouth for a reason. We look twice as hard and we listen twice as hard before we speak. And that's one thing I've learned, just to listen to elders, just sit there and listen to people, because we can learn a lot before we speak. And it's one of those things I've tried to instill on my social media is trying to remember that life is just accumulation of experiences, and the trade, if you are smart in the trades, you can have such a beautiful life. Like for myself, I try to work throughout the fall and winter and springtime, and I'll take summer off and I'll travel. I'll take 2 months off, and I'll make it all. I've actually made it all the way up to the Southamptons for an event for a powwow. So
Wow. How long, what does it take to become, to dance at the, like, because I watch your social media. You are like an incredible dancer. Like, there's obviously you're at the sort of at the front of the pack here as far as learning. How long did it take you to learn all these dances and reconnect to that extent with your culture?
that's a good question. People think I've been dancing my whole life, but I've only been dancing like May long weekend is my home community in Creston, my father's community where we have our powwow, and that's my year round. That'll be 10 years. But I think it was like not really until like my fourth year dancing, fifth years where I started to really evolve more. But I practiced like extensively, like in East Vancouver, they have the Friendship Center. So I'm fortunate enough to go down there. They had every Wednesday night. Now it's Tuesday nights, but going down there like weekly, learning and practicing, and then like on my own. And I watched countless YouTube videos and just always practicing, and then going to powwows and traveling. And it's I've, it's a humbling way of life, powwow dancing. And when I first started traveling, I would just sleep in my truck and you kind of camp out because you're there all weekend. Sometimes you're in the middle of nowhere in the prairies or the plains, and you're showering at the shower stalls they have and things like that. You're cooking on like a propane tank and things like that. But I've been able to upgrade to a RV now. But yeah, it's taking me. I want to feel like I'm still evolving as well in my dancing, but like to start getting more noticed and recognized was like 4 or 5 years of just
Mm.
steady going to powwows, dancing and practicing and then even like in my gym, even started like working out in the gym and trying to tailor it more to like more cardiovascularity and like flexibility and things like that. Depending on where you go, it's usually out in the prairies. They're 3 days, so usually Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So start Friday night, start around 7, and then they go till about 1, 2 in the morning. And like with the category I dance, usually I'm like one of the last categories of dance. And then you start on Saturday, and it's 1 in the afternoon, and they'll have a dinner break usually around 5 to 7. Then they start up again, and then you go until about 2 in the morning. And the same thing over Sunday, starting in the afternoon. And like some of these
Mm.
places you're dancing in really hot places. Remember Kamloops, they just recently changed their date, but they used to hold their event on August long weekend, and that's
Mm.
like the hottest time in Kamloops.
Yeah.
So I remember dancing at like in 43 degrees. It was
Holy.
yeah, yeah,
Wow. And that's a
Oh,
lot of regalia.
I was
it
gonna
is
say, how
too.
much
Yeah.
does your regalia weigh?
Probably about 15, 20 pounds with everything, but it also
Mm.
doesn't breathe as well. And that's one thing too with even people in the circle, like some of them aren't like they're not healthy as well. And I even try to preach like living a healthier life and exercising more like that. And one of my good friends now, he started going to the gym as well, and he really enjoys dancing now. He doesn't go out there and sometimes suffer like because
Yeah.
just the cardio and this the strength it takes and he enjoys it more now. And I'm like, that's all I was trying to do is make you enjoy it and feel good. Like you
And
do
that's
feel
the
good when you come
thing.
off. You just don't suffer as
You just
much.
don't suffer. And that's what I say about the trades,
So
right? Like
good.
these jobs are hard. They're harder. They're hard enough on their own. But like I personally, through life decisions and the way I live my life, like I made it so much harder on myself. I suffered so much extra suffering uh, because of like I just wasn't treating myself right. And now when I talk to younger people, I tell them my big piece of advice. Well, two pieces of advice: treat it like a career and not a job. So look at where you want to be in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. The second is treat yourself like an athlete. That simple change of mindset would have made a huge difference for me if I would have eaten right, trained right for the job, rested right. I would have looked after myself by seeing trainers or seeing physio or going to the doctor more often. And this is what I tell companies too: is like, what if you start treating your crews like a hockey team? You
Mm.
know, make sure you have a trainer on staff, somebody that can address these injuries as they come up and give people the timeout or the stretch or whatever it is. And I think that sets a different tone in the culture on job sites. I would love to see it.
Yeah. Like I've been extents where you get laid off and I still go to the gym and I come back tired and working, throw my belt on and it's like I never left. And then I see the guys that were laid off and they're drinking or hanging out at the beach or going down to Cancun or whatever and they're not physically active and then they're struggling when they come back to work. And me, it's just like, oh, just throw the belt back on, get back on it. Like I hadn't been gone for a couple weeks
Mhm.
or a month or ever.
I have to say, I'm just really fascinated, Peter, by this kind of general concept that you've brought up about just reducing the suffering. The words nonviolent keep coming to me, and the trades are such a violent place to be socially, emotionally, and physically. And the physical work that you're doing when you're, forging a new bridge, because you've talked about all the major bridges in the lower mainland that you worked on, or most of them. It's just like there's a violence that you're doing with that to get that structure up, and yet you found a way to interact with the world in a way that is physically, socially, in relationships, and emotionally loving, which is the opposite of violence. And I'm profoundly moved by that, because I don't think I've ever seen anything like you before, honestly.
There is a lot of indigenous people in the trades, but a lot of them are still disconnected. a lot of lost
Hmm.
souls out there. And I've met even some on my journey recently where they're just still addicted to alcohol, even they're in their late 40s or 50s. They're suffering. I come in and I kind of light them up and make them realize, hey, life's a lot better when you don't suffer. And like as of now, I actually haven't worked in the trade since I left the Stillwater Bridge, the Patella Bridge.
Hmm.
I saved up enough money and I'm going back to school for addiction counseling. And if it wasn't for the
Sweet.
trades, I wouldn't be able to sit in class and not worry about having money because I have a bunch of savings set aside from my own learning and teachings that I've been trying to pass on.
Hmm.
That's amazing. You're going to make such an incredible impact as a counselor.
Like I've just been very inspired by spending time with you today, Peter. So thank you.
Yeah.
People say everything happens for a reason, but I kind of changed that. I just tweaked it with one word and I just say everything happens for the right reason.
Mm,
Everything in your life will
Mm,
happen for the right reason. And time is going to pass no matter what. Like we're going to eventually end up getting old and passing away. Like we don't
hmm.
realize that people forget that you're going to die one day. So might as well enjoy the life that you were given. Like I'm a big believer in Creator bringing us to this earth, each with a gift in life. And you not only going to do yourself a disservice by not following that gift, but the ancestors, wherever you come from, your ancestors fought for you to be here. No matter who you
Mm,
are, where you come from in this walk of life,
hmm.
they went through hardship. They went through hard times in their life. People don't realize how valuable and like how important their life is, like
mm,
how many odds and like how it took for you to be here. Like you think about your grandparents meeting and then your great great grandparents and everyone meeting throughout their life and having a children or a child at a certain time in life. It's like 1 in 100 trillion, I believe, chances of being born and
yeah.
you were born. So like you are a gift to earth. You're a gift. It doesn't matter what walk of life you come from, what your background is, what your color of skin is. You are here for a reason, and you don't let your ancestors, their pain and suffering go in vain. And that's so big believer, and I am as well. And learning these things that I'm learning in my class, we use the Indigenous approach is the medicine wheel. And if you haven't seen the medicine wheel, you can just look it up on Google, but ultimately it's a big circle and there's four colors in it. There's red, yellow, white, and black or blue, depending on where you come from. The black or blue, I believe the Crees use blue and the Ojibwe people use black, but it goes through your life as like you start in the north and it's your youth and you go all the way around to your teen, to your mid adult life, and then you get into your elders. And it's also the four seasons of life, the summer, winter, spring, and then fall, the four seasons. And then also there was another story that was told me about it was a map of the world. And that's one thing I always like to leave with people is that map. It's those four colors that make this world. And without one of those colors in this world, the world's incomplete. So we need each other to
Mm,
complete this world. Doesn't matter where you come from on this continent, what skin your pigmentation in your life is. We need each other in
mm.
order to complete that circle.
Off the Clock Toolbox Talk is produced by Karen Jansen, Trevor Botkin, and our steering committee of men in the trades on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples. The content of this podcast is conversation between people with living experience and should not be taken as professional advice. For more information, visit tradespodcast.com.